So do you think that Bessent is just going along to get along because Bessent has signed off on the big, beautiful bill and he says that it will give him what he needs to get to that 3%?
I think the problem is that a lot of these people, including Bessent, look in 10-year horizons, and they also factor in GDP growth.
Yeah.
The problem with that is that we have seen over the last 2 decades, GDP growth is never what it needs to be to make any of this real. And all of this cut over 10 years, or if you amortize this out over 10 years, it's not that much. It always tends to be wrong. It always tends to balloon the debt. So I think you need to have a clean deficit in order to act. I don't think you can do all this fuzzy math, which is what happens.
Okay, so you're saying that you think the democratically controlled CBO numbers are correct, and that the
No, that's not what I said. I literally just I almost cuss on your channel. I literally just crapped all over them
okay, so
because they do the same thing. They give false GDP because you don't know what it is. You're assuming
1.7. They're
okay,
basically
and maybe that's overdoing it. Maybe look at the last GDP reading. Look how low that was. So maybe they're overstating. Maybe they're understating. Who knows? But they're still looking out over 10 years, and right, their projections are not cogent.
okay. So
It's no different than a Tesla investor in 2020 telling you where the stock will be in 2025. They're as good as that person predicting.
you still have to predict. You can't do a budget without making. I can't do a household budget without predicting that I'm
Yes,
still.
you can. No,
No,
you
I can't.
can't.
I say I can't do a household budget if I don't project my income, if I don't project my
You,
food expenses, if I don't project my.
no, sir. No,
Okay.
sir. That's not how you do your household income. You know how much you're bringing in, and then you spend based off that. And if you're not doing it that way, you're doing it wrong.
Okay, but if I say I'm going to bring in $100,000 next year, and all of a sudden YouTube cancels my channel, I don't bring in $100,000. To your point, if Bessent says we're going to bring in 300 billion from tariffs, and all of a sudden there's a change in the way that the Supreme Court says something about tariffs, and it's only 200 billion, well then that was not
If
predictable.
that's what we were talking about, these 1% externalities, like, oh, you might get laid off or something like that, I would say that's a fair, but that's not analogous with what we're talking about here.
Okay,
We're talking about fuzzy math, projecting out decade ahead of time, figuring out what is GDP, how much are we going to bring in when nobody actually knows. You know how much you make monthly. You know it. You might be 2 to 3% off. You know how much you make. Everybody knows how much they make monthly. It's even people in sales, even realtors, even people who are on commission. They know what at least their base is, what they can conservatively estimate.
Right.
So it's not the same. It's very different. And from there, a proper budget, you budget around what you bring in.
Okay,
Not
so
what you think you might bring in. The raise I might get next year in this potential hypothetical commission check.
all right, so maybe the better analogy would be a business. So you've got a business and you've got X number of customers. In my case, my little water bottle business, I had the mass market, I had the bicycle shops, I had the international customers, I had the, however many different, let's call it 10 different categories of customers. Not only did I not know whether Target would still be with me next year or whether they would increase or decrease, I didn't know whether there'd be a recession in the second quarter, which might cut my sales, which it did in 2000, September of 2000, cut my sales in 25% in 1 month, but it also cut the sales of General Motors, Ford, and everybody else in 1 month by 25%. So I can project as best I can what customers I think are going to do next year. I can aggregate them. I can look at 5 or 10 or 20 years of history and say what happened in all those historical years. What do I think that's going to do in terms of next year? But also look at the economy and say, what do I think the economy is going to do that might impact this? And then come up with a number. But boy, it can be off by 5%, 10%, 20%. I mean, it's not that hard for it to be.
And when you do that for a business, you're not going to sit there and be more bullish than what you have seen historically. Historically, right now, we barely make a 2% GDP. Historically, I think it's even 1 point something over the last like 20 years. So even with your example here, like you wouldn't, even no matter what business you are not going to be overly optimistic about how much you're going to bring in. Like you'll want that, but you're not going to make buying decisions, equipment, supply based on maybe I'll sell this amount, right? You need to balance how much you're putting out there in inventory, how much you're collecting with what you're going to sell. And ideally, you have a demand problem, not a supply problem, right? But even then, it's still not a good analogy, besides the fact that I just pointed out there, because as a business, you're providing a value. The government doesn't provide value. The government steals from all of us.
Well, it protects our borders, and I mean, sometimes depends on the president.
Yeah, and if that's all they did,